Before we begin this incredible story, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so you never miss another amazing, true story like this one. Now, let's dive into a journey that will leave you speechless. The morning sun painted the sky in shades of pink and orange as Sarah Mitchell stood at the departure gate of Bangkok International Airport. She wore a simple white linen shirt and comfortable jeans, her brown hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. A small backpack hung from her shoulders, and in her hand she clutched a boarding pass for Flight 447 to Sydney. To everyone around her, she was just another tourist ending her vacation in Southeast Asia. Sarah had spent 2 weeks exploring Thailand's temples and beaches, taking photographs and eating street food like any other traveler. She smiled politely at fellow passengers, helped an elderly woman lift her carry-on into the overhead bin, and settled into her window seat in row 23. The plane was full, carrying 320 souls, including crew members. Families with excited children, business travelers typing on laptops, and couples holding hands filled every seat as the Boeing 777 taxied down the runway. Sarah gazed out the window at the city disappearing below. She thought about her quiet life back home, the garden she tended, and the books she loved to read. Nobody on this plane knew her story. Nobody knew what she had done before she became a tourist with a camera. And that was exactly how she wanted it. The flight attendants moved through the cabin with their practiced smiles, offering drinks and snacks. Sarah accepted a cup of coffee and opened a novel, appearing completely relaxed. 3 hours into the flight, as they cruised at 35,000 feet over the Andaman Sea, something changed. A strange shuddering ran through the aircraft. The seatbelt sign dinged on. Then the plane dropped suddenly, causing gasps and screams throughout the cabin. Sarah's book fell to the floor. But her eyes were already alert, scanning, calculating. The overhead bins rattled. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling like plastic jellyfish. Parents grabbed their children. A man across the aisle began praying loudly. The aircraft shook again, harder this time, and the lights flickered. Through the cockpit door, which had swung partially open in the turbulence, Sarah could see the pilots struggling with the controls. Their faces showed something that made her blood run cold. It was not just concern, it was fear. The captain's voice came through the speakers, but it was tight with stress. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing technical difficulties. Please remain calm and keep your seatbelts fastened." But Sarah knew that tone. She had heard it before in very different circumstances. This was not a minor problem. This was a crisis. The plane tilted at an unnatural angle and several passengers began to cry. A flight attendant, barely keeping her composure, moved through the aisle trying to calm people down. Sarah sat perfectly still, her mind working rapidly. She looked at the angle of the wings through her window, felt the rhythm of the engines, noticed the way the aircraft was responding to the pilot's commands. Her trained instincts, dormant for years, suddenly awakened like a sleeping giant. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. A flight attendant immediately rushed over. "Ma'am, you must sit down." But Sarah was already moving toward the front of the plane, her tourist disguise falling away with each determined step. The flight attendant grabbed Sarah's arm, but Sarah turned to face her with eyes that had changed completely. Gone was the relaxed tourist. In her place stood someone with absolute authority and purpose. "I'm a pilot," Sarah said clearly, her voice cutting through the chaos. "I need to get to the cockpit right now." The attendant hesitated. Looking at this woman in tourist clothes suddenly seemed like a completely different person. Another violent shake rocked the aircraft. Luggage burst from an overhead compartment, crashing into the aisle. The screaming intensified. The flight attendant made a split-second decision and nodded, leading Sarah quickly toward the cockpit door. She knocked rapidly using an emergency code. The door opened a crack, and the co-pilot's frightened face appeared. "We have a passenger who says she's a pilot," the attendant shouted over the noise of alarms and rushing air. The co-pilot started to refuse, but Sarah pushed forward. "Captain Marcus Wright, United States Air Force, retired," she said with steel in her voice. "I've logged over 3,000 hours in military aircraft, including combat missions. I can help you." The co-pilot's eyes widened. The plane dropped again, and he stumbled backward. The captain, an experienced commercial pilot named David Chen, turned in his seat. His face was covered in sweat. "The hydraulic system is failing," he gasped. "We're losing control surfaces. The backup systems aren't responding." Sarah stepped into the cockpit and immediately assessed the situation. The instrument panels were lit up like a Christmas tree, every warning light flashing red or amber. The artificial horizon showed they were in a dangerous descent. Outside the windscreen, the blue sea was getting closer. Her military training kicked in automatically, her mind processing information at incredible speed. "Altitude," she demanded. 22,000 feet and dropping, the co-pilot responded, his hands shaking on the controls. "Rate of descent?" 1,800 feet per minute and accelerating. Sarah leaned between the two pilots, her eyes scanning the gauges. She reached for the throttle controls, her movements precise and confident despite the aircraft's violent shaking. "Captain Chen, I need you to focus on the trim tabs." "Co-pilot, what's your name?" "Johnson, ma'am." "Johnson, you're going to help me with the manual override. We can't rely on the computers anymore. We're going old school." She was already thinking 3 steps ahead, calculating angles and speeds, remembering procedures from her combat days when she had landed damaged aircraft under enemy fire. The captain looked at her for one long moment. He had to make a choice. Trust this stranger who appeared from the passenger cabin, or keep fighting a losing battle alone. He saw something in her eyes, something that told him she knew exactly what she was doing. "Tell us what you need," he said, and moved his hands to the trim tab controls. Sarah took a deep breath. This was it. 320 lives depended on what happened in the next few minutes. "First, we need to stop this descent," Sarah said, her voice calm and controlled despite the emergency. "The hydraulic failure means we've lost normal control. We still have engines and some control authority through differential thrust." "Johnson, give me maximum power on engines 1 and 3. "Captain, I need nose-up trim, 2 degrees. Her hands moved across controls she hadn't touched in years, but her muscle memory was perfect. The aircraft responded slightly, the nose lifting just a bit. In the cabin behind them, passengers clung to their seats, praying, crying, some writing goodbye messages on their phones. They had no idea that their fate now rested with a woman who had been eating pad thai on a Bangkok beach just yesterday, keeping her incredible past hidden from the world. The aircraft shuddered as Sarah adjusted the engine thrust, trying to stabilize their descent. Sweat dripped down her face, but her hands remained steady. "We're at 19,000 feet, Johnson called out, his voice shaking. "Descent rate is down to 1,200 feet per minute." Through the windscreen, Sarah could see nothing but ocean in every direction. No land, no airports, nowhere to make an emergency landing except the water below. Captain Chen fought with the trim tabs, his experience and Sarah's instructions working together. "I've got a little more control," he reported. "But it's like steering a shopping cart with broken wheels." Sarah knew exactly what he meant. She had once landed an F-16 with half its tail section blown off during a mission over hostile territory. This was different, but the principles were the same. Stay calm, use what works, and never give up. "Johnson, I need you to radio the nearest airport. Tell them we have a hydraulic failure and may need to attempt a water landing. Give them our coordinates and passenger count." While Johnson made the emergency call, Sarah's mind raced through options. A water landing in a Boeing 777 was incredibly dangerous. The aircraft was not designed for it, and the survival rate was unpredictable. But if they could not regain enough control to reach land, it might be their only choice. She thought of all those people in the cabin. The elderly woman she had helped with her bag, the children she had heard laughing before takeoff, the young couple on their honeymoon she had seen kissing in the terminal. They all trusted that this aircraft would carry them safely to their destination. "Captain, what's our fuel status?" Sarah asked. Chen checked his gauges. "We have about 40 minutes of fuel remaining at current consumption," Sarah nodded. 40 minutes to either save everyone or die trying. She made a decision. "We're going to use asymmetric thrust to create a turning moment. It's a technique we used in the military when control surfaces failed. We'll essentially steer the aircraft using just the engines." Captain Chen looked doubtful. "I've never done anything like that in a commercial aircraft." Sarah smiled grimly. "Neither have I, but I've done it in fighters, and the physics are the same, just on a bigger scale. Adjusting engine power on different sides of the aircraft to create controlled turns. It was like trying to drive a car by only using the gas pedal and no steering wheel. Every movement had to be calculated perfectly. Too much power on one side, and they would enter an uncontrollable spin. Too little, and they would not be able to maneuver at all. The aircraft slowly responded, banking gently to the left as Sarah reduced power on the right engines and increased it on the left. "It's working," Johnson exclaimed with the first hint of hope in his voice, but Sarah knew they were not safe yet. "We're at 16,000 feet now," she said, watching the altimeter. "We've slowed the descent, but we need to find somewhere to land." Johnson looked up from his radio. "The nearest airport is Phuket, but it's 120 miles away. They're clearing all runways for us." Sarah did some quick mental calculations. With their current fuel, descent rate, and the limited control they had, reaching Phuket would be nearly impossible. It was going to take a miracle or something close to it. She glanced back through the cockpit door at the cabin full of terrified passengers and made a silent promise. She had not revealed her secret and stepped forward just to fail now. The aircraft hit another pocket of turbulent air, reminding them all that nature was not going to make this easy. Alarms continued to sound throughout the cockpit, creating a symphony of mechanical distress. Sarah blocked it all out, focusing only on what mattered: altitude, speed, heading, and fuel. These four numbers would determine if 320 people lived or died today. 14,000 feet, Captain Chen called out. "We're still descending." Sarah's jaw tightened. Time was running out, and she needed to do something bold. Sarah stared at the instruments, her combat pilot instincts telling her they needed to make a choice right now. "We're not going to make it to Phuket with conventional flying," she said quietly. Captain Chen turned to look at her. "What are you suggesting?" Sarah took a deep breath. What she was about to propose was dangerous, possibly crazy, but it might be their only chance. "We need to put this aircraft into a controlled glide. We cut power to almost nothing and use gravity to our advantage, gliding toward Phuket while using engine thrust, only for directional control. It will save fuel and give us more distance." Johnson's eyes went wide. "That's insane. We'll fall out of the sky." Sarah shook her head. "We're already falling. This way, we fall in the direction we want to go. I've done it before in combat when my fuel was almost gone and I was still 50 miles from base. The glide ratio of this aircraft is better than you think. We can stretch every gallon of fuel much further." Captain Chen studied her face. He saw no doubt there, only determination and experience. "You really think this will work?" Sarah met his eyes. "I know it will work, but we have to commit completely. No second guessing, no panic. Just trust the physics and fly the aircraft." The captain thought for 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. Then he nodded. "Okay, Captain Mitchell. We're in your hands now. Tell us what to do." Sarah felt the weight of command settle on her shoulders, a familiar feeling from her years in the military. "First, we need to inform the cabin crew. They need to prepare the passengers for a rough ride and possible water landing. Johnson, make that announcement, but keep it calm. Don't cause more panic than necessary." Johnson picked up the intercom with shaking hands and spoke to the flight attendants, giving them instructions on emergency procedures. Meanwhile, Sarah began the delicate process of reducing engine power while maintaining just enough control to keep the aircraft pointed toward Phuket. The artificial horizon showed their glide angle increasing. They were now falling at a steeper angle but moving forward faster. 12,000 feet, Chen called out. "Ground speed is 180 knots. Distance to Phuket is 90 miles. Sarah did the math in her head. They were in a race against altitude. Would they run out of sky before they reached the runway? It was going to be incredibly close. Through the cockpit window, she could see clouds below them now, and beyond those clouds, the ocean waiting like a hungry mouth in the cabin. The senior flight attendant, a woman named Maria, with 20 years of experience, moved through the aisles trying to keep passengers calm. She explained that they were dealing with a technical problem and preparing for all possibilities. Some passengers sobbed quietly. Others sat in stunned silence. A few prayed. The elderly woman Sarah had helped earlier gripped her armrests with white knuckles. The honeymooning couple held each other tightly. A businessman frantically texted his family goodbye messages. This was every traveler's nightmare coming true. Back in the cockpit, Sarah made constant, tiny adjustments to the engine thrust, keeping the aircraft balanced and on course. It was like walking a tightrope while juggling. One mistake, and they would enter a spin they could never recover from. 10,000 feet, Captain Chen announced. Fuel is getting critical. We have maybe 20 minutes left. Sarah nodded, not taking her eyes off the horizon. Distance to Phuket. 70 miles. Still too far, but they were making progress. The aircraft glided through the air. It's a massive machine defying its fate through the skill and courage of 3 people in the cockpit. Suddenly, Johnson shouted, "Contact with Phuket Tower. They have emergency vehicles standing by. They're asking if we can make the runway or if they should prepare for a water rescue near the coast." Sarah looked at the numbers one more time. Altitude, fuel, distance. Her mind calculated probabilities and risks at lightning speed. "Tell them we're coming in," she said firmly. "We're going to land this aircraft on that runway, not in the water." She said it with such confidence that both men believed her. But deep inside, Sarah knew the truth. They were attempting something that had never been successfully done before. They were trying to glide a crippled Boeing 777 70 miles to an emergency landing, and they had just one chance to get it right. The coastline of Thailand appeared on the horizon like a thin brown line between blue sea and blue sky. Sarah felt a surge of hope mixed with fear. They had made it this far, but the hardest part was still ahead. Landing a damaged aircraft with almost no hydraulic control and fuel, running on fumes, required precision that left no room for error. 8,000 feet, Captain Chen called out. Distance to runway, 45 miles. We might actually make it. But Sarah could see the problem in the numbers. They were too high for their distance. If they continued at this glide angle, they would overshoot the airport. "We need to lose altitude faster," Sarah said. "I'm going to use a technique called forward slip. We'll essentially fly sideways through the air to create more drag and drop faster without picking up speed." Johnson looked confused. Fly sideways. In a 777, Sarah was already adjusting the engine thrust, creating an imbalance that made the aircraft yaw to the left while she used the trim tabs to keep the nose pointed toward the runway. The aircraft began to fly at an angle, presenting more surface area to the wind. It was uncomfortable and looked completely wrong, but it worked. Their descent rate increased while their forward speed remained controlled. Passengers in the cabin felt the strange sensation of the aircraft flying crooked and crab-like through the sky. Some screamed. Others prayed harder. Maria, the flight attendant, braced herself against a seat and continued speaking calmly, though her own heart was racing. "We're making our approach to the airport. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened tightly. Place your heads down and brace when I give the signal." Her voice was steady, but inside she wondered if she would ever see her children again. She thought about her daughter's upcoming birthday, her son's graduation, all the moments she might miss. 6,000 feet, Chen announced. 30 miles to runway. The numbers were looking better, but they were not safe yet. Sarah could see Phuket International Airport now, a small collection of buildings and runways in the distance. Emergency vehicles lined the runway, their lights flashing like tiny red and blue stars. News helicopters circled at a safe distance. On the ground, airport staff and emergency crews watched the sky, knowing they were about to witness either a miracle or a tragedy. The airport director had evacuated nearby buildings and stopped all other traffic. Every eye was on Flight 447. Sarah's hands moved constantly across the controls, making micro-adjustments to keep the wounded aircraft flying. Her military training had prepared her for high-stress situations, but this was different. In combat, she had only been responsible for herself. Now, 320 lives depended on her decisions. She thought briefly about her old squadron, her fellow pilots, who had called her the best of the best. She wondered what they would think seeing her now, years after retirement, fighting to save a passenger jet in tourist clothes. She allowed herself a thin smile. Once a pilot, always a pilot. 4,000 feet, Captain Chen said, and then added urgently, "Fuel warning light is on." "We're running on vapor," Sarah nodded. This was it. They were committed now. There was no going around, no second attempt. They would land on this approach or crash trying. "Johnson, give me landing gear down." Johnson hesitated. "If we lower the gear, it will create massive drag. We might not make the runway." Sarah's voice was firm. "We need the gear down, or we can't land safely. Do it now." Johnson reached for the manual gear extension lever, since the hydraulic system could not lower the wheels normally. There was a grinding sound and a heavy thunk as the landing gear dropped into position and locked. The aircraft immediately slowed and began descending faster. Sarah adjusted the engines again, squeezing every last bit of thrust from them. The runway was now clearly visible ahead, a long strip of concrete that looked both too close and too far away at the same time. 2,000 feet, Captain Chen said quietly. 1 mile from runway threshold. Sarah could see individual cars on the roads below, buildings, trees. The ground was rushing up to meet them. "This is going to be rough," she warned. "Tell the cabin to brace now." Chen keyed the intercom. "Brace for impact. Brace, brace, brace." Throughout the cabin, passengers put their heads down, grabbed their ankles, and prepared for whatever came next. The runway lights flashed past on either side as Flight 447 crossed the threshold at just 500 feet altitude. Sarah's eyes darted between the windscreen and the instruments, her hands making final adjustments to the engine thrust. The aircraft was coming in fast, faster than normal, but it was under control. 100 feet, Chen called. 50 feet. 30. Sarah cut the engine power completely, letting gravity take over. The ground rushed up. 20 feet, 10. The rear wheels touched concrete with a screech of rubber that sounded like a scream. The aircraft bounced slightly, then settled. The nose gear came down hard, and the entire aircraft shook violently. Sarah immediately began working the engine thrust in reverse. Trying to slow the massive machine without the benefit of normal braking systems, the aircraft veered to the left as the damaged hydraulics failed to keep it straight. Captain Chen fought the steering with the nose wheel tiller, while Sarah used asymmetric reverse thrust to counteract the drift. The runway markers flashed past at terrifying speed. Emergency vehicles raced alongside, ready to act if the aircraft ran off the runway or caught fire. Inside the cabin, passengers were thrown forward against their seatbelts. Luggage crashed around. Someone screamed. But they were on the ground, and they were still alive. The aircraft finally slowed to a stop, 3/4 of the way down the runway, angled awkwardly, but intact. For a moment, there was complete silence in the cockpit. Then Captain Chen let out a breath he did not realize he had been holding. "We did it," he whispered. Johnson was crying with relief. Sarah sat back in the jump seat, her hands finally starting to shake now that the emergency was over. She looked out at the foam-covered runway, emergency vehicles surrounding them, and the terminal building in the distance. They had actually done it. All 320 people were safe. In the cabin, the silence broke as passengers realized they had survived. Some burst into tears. Others laughed with hysterical relief. A few applauded. The elderly woman Sarah had helped was sobbing with joy. The honeymooning couple kissed like they would never let go. The businessman immediately called his family. Maria, the flight attendant, began the evacuation procedures with shaking hands, her professional training taking over even though she wanted to collapse. The emergency slides deployed, and passengers began evacuating the aircraft in an orderly rush. Fire trucks sprayed foam around the plane while paramedics stood ready to help anyone injured. Sarah stood up in the cockpit, suddenly exhausted. Captain Chen grabbed her hand and shook it firmly. "You saved us all," he said with emotion thick in his voice. "Where did you learn to fly like that?" Sarah smiled tiredly. "It's a long story." Johnson was already talking to the tower, reporting their safe landing. Airport officials were rushing toward the aircraft. Sarah knew what came next. Questions, investigations, media attention. Her quiet retirement was over. The secret she had kept for years was about to become public knowledge. She thought about walking away, disappearing into the crowd of evacuated passengers, but she knew she could not. She had a responsibility to explain what happened, as Sarah climbed down from the cockpit and walked through the empty cabin toward the exit. She passed the elderly woman's seat. The woman's book was still there, left behind in the evacuation. Sarah picked it up and saw it was a novel about brave women in history. She smiled at the irony. Outside, camera crews were already filming. News of the emergency landing was spreading around the world. By tomorrow, everyone would know about the tourist who saved 320 lives. Sarah stepped out into the bright Thai sunlight and descended the emergency slide. At the bottom, airport officials and journalists waited with questions. She took a deep breath and prepared to tell her story. Later that evening, in airports and living rooms around the world, people watched the news coverage. They learned about Captain Marcus Wright, or rather Major Sarah Mitchell, who had served 12 years in the United States Air Force. They saw footage of her in uniform from years ago. Standing next to fighter jets, receiving medals for bravery, they learned she had flown over 80 combat missions, earned the Distinguished Flying Cross, and was one of the most decorated female pilots in military history. After retiring, she had chosen a quiet life, never seeking attention or glory. She became the woman who preferred gardens to glory, books to battles. When reporters asked Sarah why she had kept her past secret, she said simply, "I did what anyone would do. I saw people in danger and used my skills to help. That's what pilots do. That's what anyone should do." But everyone knew it was more than that. She had performed a feat that would be studied in aviation schools for years to come. She had taken a dying aircraft and brought it safely to Earth through skill, courage, and an unshakable determination to save lives. The passengers of Flight 447 called her a hero. Sarah called herself lucky. In the months that followed, Sarah Mitchell returned home to a life that was no longer quiet. She received awards from aviation organizations, was invited to speak at conferences, and was asked to consult on aircraft safety procedures. The passengers she saved kept in touch, sending her letters and cards. The elderly woman sent her books. The honeymooning couple named their first child after her. The businessman started a scholarship fund in her name. But Sarah remained humble, insisting she had only done her job. She went back to her garden eventually, though now reporters occasionally showed up to interview her. On the first anniversary of the emergency landing, all 320 passengers and crew gathered in Phuket for a reunion. They met at the airport, standing on the same runway where Sarah had performed her miracle. They held hands and thanked her. Some cried. All of them knew they were living on borrowed time, given back to them by a woman who happened to be on their flight. A woman who could have stayed in her seat and done nothing. A woman who chose to reveal her secret and risk everything to save strangers. That night, as fireworks lit up the sky over Phuket, Sarah stood surrounded by the people whose lives she had changed forever. She finally understood that some secrets are meant to be revealed, and some tourists are meant to be heroes.